In the heart of Cairo, in the aging neighborhood of Eldarb El Amar, there lived a man named Mahmoud. He was a quiet and reserved man, known to his neighbors as a dedicated watchmaker. His shop, an ancient relic from another era, stood at the far end of a narrow alley where the light barely touched the ground. The walls of the shop were lined with clocks and watches, some of them dating back centuries. The locals swore that Mahmoud's place had a peculiar aura, one that made your skin prickle as soon as you entered. Mahmoud himself was a man of few words, but everyone knew he had a story that no one dared to ask about directly. One particularly cold and moonless night, Mahmoud stayed late in his shop, fixing an old grandfather clock that had been brought in by a frightened young woman earlier that day. She had pleaded with Mahmoud to repair it, saying it was cursed and her family had been plagued with misfortune ever since it had stopped working. Mahmoud, unfazed by her story, agreed to take a look. He was meticulous in his work, his hands moving with precision only a few could boast of. As the night grew darker and colder, Mahmoud noticed something peculiar. The hands of the clock began to move on their own, ticking loudly despite the absence of any visible mechanism driving them. The shop grew unbearably cold, and Mahmoud could see his own breath misting in front of him. Suddenly, the clock struck midnight with an ominous chime that echoed through the empty alleyway. The room filled with a suffocating silence. Mahmoud felt a chill run down his spine. He looked around. The shadows seemed to stretch and grow, wrapping around him like ghostly tendrils. Then he saw it, a figure standing at the far end of the room, shrouded in darkness. Its eyes glowed with a sinister light, locking onto Mahmoud. The room smelled of decay and something far worse that Mahmoud couldn't place. His heart pounded in his chest as the figure slowly advanced. Mahmoud tried to move, but his limbs felt like they were made of lead. As the figure came closer, he could see its twisted, ghastly face, an amalgamation of pain and malevolence. It raised a skeletal hand and pointed directly at the grandfather clock. Mahmoud understood. They wanted him to destroy the clock. Summoning the last of his strength, Mahmoud lurched forward and grabbed a heavy wrench from his workbench. With all the force he could muster, he swung it at the clock. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces as the figure let out an ear-piercing scream, engulfing the room in complete darkness. The next morning, the sun broke the darkness, casting light into the narrow alleyway. The neighbors found Mahmoud unconscious on the floor of his shop, the grandfather clock reduced to rubble. When he awoke, he simply said, "It is done," and refused to speak of the incident ever again. Word spread quickly, and the young woman who had brought the clock returned, overjoyed, thanking Mahmoud profusely. From that day on, Mahmoud's shop was different. The air felt lighter, the shadows less menacing. However, the story of that cold, moonless night remained with the people of Eldarb El Amar, a tale of terror and the courage of a quiet watchmaker.